The Bahrain Grand Prix, a staple of Formula 1 in the 21st century. Since its introduction in 2004, it has never been far from controversy and has produced many iconic moments in recent Formula 1 history. On this channel, we do enjoy a good ranking, usually of cars and drivers. This time, things are going to change a bit. We're going to rank races, a much more subjective topic. However, for the first time in this channel's history, I have had absolutely no say on these rankings, and they have been decided entirely by you, my subscribers. In the run-up to this year's running of it, I asked each of you to give your personal rankings of all 18 runnings of the Bahrain Grand Prix, and I've assigned points ranging from 1 to 18 to each individual ranking you gave for each race, and then divided that by the number of responses to get an average ranking. So, let's see what your verdict is. So, in 18th and last, you voted for 2010. The 2010 Bahrain Grand Prix was a race of firsts. It was the first race of the 2010s, the first race without refuelling since 1993, the first race with points for the top 10 finishers, the first race for defending champion Jenson Button at McLaren, Michael Schumacher and Nico Rosberg at Mercedes, and the first race of Schumacher's comeback, Fernando Alonso at Ferrari, Rubens Barrichello at Williams, Robert Kubica at Renault, Jarno Trulli and Heikki Kovalainen at Lotus, Pedro Della Rosa and Kamui Kobayashi at Sauber, Timo Glock at Virgin, the first race for Mercedes as a constructor since 1955, the first race for Sauber with Ferrari engines, and the first ever race for Nico Hülkenberg, Vitaly Petrov, Karun Chandhok, Bruno Senna, Lucas di Grassi and Lotus, Virgin and HRT. As it also marked Formula 1's 60th anniversary year, all living former champions except for Nelson Piquet and Kimi Raikkonen, and unknowingly 2 future champions, attended the race, and all of them, except for Jack Brabham, who was 84 years old at the time and the last surviving champion from the 1950s, did parade laps in their championship-winning cars. As well as this, it was also the first and so far only running of the Bahrain Grand Prix on the extended endurance layout, extending the circuit's length by over half a mile. Unfortunately, this extension was made up almost entirely of blind, low-speed corners, not affording any new overtaking spots. As the first race of the year, it was a race of attrition with numerous teething problems, particularly with the 3 new teams at the back of the grid. It was the Red Bull of Sebastian Vettel that took pole, and he comfortably led the opening stint. No refuelling and super durable Bridgestone tyres meant the entire grid did a one-stop strategy, and there was little to no on-track overtaking. Midway through the race, Vettel's Renault V8 decided to identify as a V6, and while he could keep the pace in the new endurance sector, he had no power on the straights and was passed by Alonso, Massa and Hamilton and finished 4th, and Alonso managed to win on his debut with Ferrari. Schumacher on his highly anticipated return finished a slightly anticlimactic 6th, behind Rosberg, defending champion Button was 7th, and there were only 15 finishers from 24 starters. In 17th, you voted for 2007. Not the most eventful race in the world. Felipe Massa was fastest all weekend and took pole, and a comfortable lights to flag victory with fastest lap. A young Lewis Hamilton finished 2nd, and was beginning to make people listen as he became the first Formula 1 driver to finish on the podium in their first 3 races. Beyond this, little else happened besides a first lap collision between Scott Speed and Jenson Button triggering the first ever safety car at Sakhir. In 16th, you voted for 2004. This is a race that could well be a victim of recency bias, having taken place almost 19 years ago. It's historic, obviously, as the first ever Bahrain Grand Prix and the first Grand Prix in the Middle East. Visually, it wasn't much of a spectacle, despite the rather unique environment, as a lot of the facilities were still being built. It did, however, prove a worthy challenge for the drivers, as a brand new, very dusty circuit in sweltering temperatures that tested both the tyres and the driver's stamina. Unsurprisingly, it was Michael Schumacher that took pole position, and a track temperature drop of 20 degrees on race day meant he had little concerns over tyre endurance, and he took a comfortable win, the 3rd of 3 races so far that year and the 73rd of his career, and also the fastest lap. Fernando Alonso started 17th but climbed up to 6th, and McLaren had a mare with a double retirement. In 15th, you voted for 2015. Let's be honest, 2015 was a dog shit season. There was almost nothing of merit. Jules Bianchi died, the title battle wasn't particularly close, and it was grid penalties galore, though Vettel put on one of the best campaigns of his career, and Hungary was fairly crazy, I guess. Bahrain was pretty dull. Lewis Hamilton took a fairly easy win. Rosberg had overheating brakes, Raikkonen was in no position to challenge him, and Vettel had an off and broke his front wing and finished 5th. Jenson Button never started the race, and Toro Rosso had a double retirement. In 14th, you voted for 2016. The 2016 race was reasonably well set up after what had been a stormer of a race in Australia, which had been spoiled somewhat by the introduction of a new elimination-style qualifying format in which every 90 seconds the slowest driver in the timings would be eliminated. Predictably, the FIA had not thought it through, and the teams immediately found loopholes which meant it had the opposite effect of what was intended and meant that large parts of qualifying had no one on track, when it was supposed to encourage the drivers to set laps continuously. So, this was to be the second and final running of it before returning to the knockout system we know and love today. Hamilton took pole, but as within Australia had a poor start and was passed by Rosberg and then collided with Valtteri Bottas at turn 1 and finished 3rd, giving Rosberg an easy win en route to the title. Romain Grosjean put on one of his finest drives and made some 8 on-track overtakes to finish 5th and be voted driver of the day for the second race in a row. Vettel saw the only DNS of his career after an engine failure on the formation lap, which meant further down the line that he retired on 299 race starts. Stoffel Vandoorne as well had an impressive debut, filling in for Fernando Alonso, who was injured following his monster crash of Esteban Gutierrez in Australia and finished 10th. In 13th, you voted for 2005. 2005 saw the only permanent changes to the circuit made so far, as turn 4 was widened, which extended the circuit's length by 5 metres. Ferrari ran the F2005 here for the first time, having used a B-spec model of the all-conquering F2004 for the first 2 races, but it was Fernando Alonso who took pole. Records were broken on race day. First, temperature records with an air temperature of 42.5 degrees Celsius and track temperatures of 56 degrees Celsius, and then Pedro Della Rosa, who was filling in for an injured Juan Pablo Montoya at McLaren and had not raced since 2002, who set a lap record that he still holds to this day. Schumacher pushed Alonso hard in the opening laps until he spun on lap 12 after the hydraulics gave out, and Alonso took a comfortable win, 13 seconds ahead of Jarno Trulli in second. The heat made it a race of attrition with just 13 classified finishers. In 12th, you voted for 2008. This is a race that's close to my heart, as it is the one that made me an F1 fan. My whole life I've been passionate about cars, motoring and motor racing, but as a child I was more interested in road cars and homologation race cars than single-seaters, and gave relatively little attention to Formula 1 because of this, though I still knew who drivers like Schumacher, Hakkinen, Montoya, etc. were. In 2007 I watched a handful of races, back when it was free to wear in the UK of course, as like most Brits, Hamilton's appearance on the grid had reinvigorated many people's interest. And then, on a Sunday afternoon in April 2008, I saw this race was on, and in these subsequent 15 years have missed maybe half a dozen. Back to the race itself, the media were enjoying themselves, as in the run-up to the race, News of the World spilled the tea on then FIA President Max Mosley's Nazi sex parties, so he felt it best to sit this one out. This, of course, is where Robert Kubica took the sole pole position of his career. There was drama at the start, which included a few collisions on the first lap, and most famously Hamilton rear-ending former teammate Alonso on lap 2 and breaking his front wing. Was this simply a careless error from Hamilton in his relative inexperience at the time, or was it another one of Alonso's 4D chess moves on account of him still being butthurt over 2007? Who knows? Kubica's pole position did not last, and Felipe Massa won the race for the second year in a row. In 11th, you voted for 2017. The main standout point for the 2017 race is it was Valtteri Bottas' first pole position, in only his 3rd race with Mercedes. He would have to wait for his first win however, as Vettel passed him and he got his first Valtteri at James. Vettel won, and Hamilton lost his chance at winning after getting a 5-second time penalty for blocking Daniel Ricciardo in the pit lane. Further back, Verstappen had a brake failure, Sainz and Stroll collided, and Alonso gave us GP2 engine part 2.
Can overtake me 300 meters behind me at the beginning of the straight. I never raced with less power in my life. How is it possible?
In 10th, you voted for 2009. 2009 saw a surprise front row lockout by Toyota, who that year couldn't seem to make up their mind about if they were fighting for the title or for points. Q3 laps being done on race fuel, and the grid being so mixed up that year due to the new breed of cars meant that qualifying pace was often misleading, and Jarno Trulli and Timo Glock dropped to 3rd and 7th, and Jenson Button took his 3rd of 6 wins on his way to the championship. Aside from that, little else happened save from a single retirement from Kazuki Nakajima. In 9th, you voted for 2013. 2013, interestingly enough, had an identical podium to 2012, with Vettel winning, Raikkonen 2nd and Grosjean 3rd, in cars that were basically the same as well. As with 2012, Paul di Resta ran an unreasonably long first stint, but it paid off as he finished a career best 4th. Sergio Perez got himself in a bit of hot water with McLaren after battling unnecessarily aggressively with teammate Jenson Button, and Nico Rosberg showed off the absolute shambles that was the 2013 tyres and Mercedes race pace by starting on pole and finishing 9th. In 8th, you voted for 2018. Here, Vettel took one of his more challenging wins, just about holding off Bottas on extremely worn out tyres who was hounding him in the closing laps, but unable to get past. They were so worn out because teammate Raikkonen ran over a mechanic in the pit lane and broke his leg, which meant they had to abort Vettel's planned second stop. Hamilton had a rough race as he qualified 4th and was demoted to 9th following a gearbox change, and then had the first of many collisions with Verstappen on the second lap, and after a very nice triple overtake eventually finished 3rd, whereas Red Bull had both drivers out within the first 4 laps. Pierre Gasly as well had his breakthrough race, starting 5th and finishing 4th, better than anything he ever did with Red Bull. In 7th, you voted for 2019. Mercedes commanding 1-2 in Australia and a floundering performance by Ferrari and Red Bull did not bode well for the 2019 season. There was a ray of hope, however, as at the next round in Bahrain, Ferrari dominated qualifying and Charles Leclerc took a shock pole position in just his 2nd race with them. He, however, dropped to 3rd at the start, but meant business as he passed Bottas on lap 2 and Vettel on lap 6 to retake the lead. Later on, however, his V6 then decided to identify as a V5, and he dropped behind both Mercedes and would have to continue to wait for his first win. Vettel showed that he had not got over his spinning habits when he did so battling with Hamilton, though this time without making contact, and had flat spotted the tyre so badly that it shook the front wing off. Elsewhere, Grosjean had a first lap collision with Stroll, and both Renaults broke down in the dying laps, having collided on the first lap. In 6th, you voted for 2006. Like 2010, 2006 was a race of firsts. The first race of the 2.4 litre V8 era, the first race with the current qualifying system, the first race for Felipe Massa with Ferrari, Jenson Button and Rubens Barrichello with Honda, Nick Heidfeld and Jacques Villeneuve with BMW Sauber, Vitantonio Liuzzi with Toro Rosso, Christian Albers and Thiago Monteiro with Midland, and Takuma Sato with Super Aguri, the first race for Honda as a constructor since 1968, the first race for Red Bull with Ferrari engines, and the first ever race for BMW Sauber, Toro Rosso, Midland, Super Aguri, Nico Rosberg, Scott Speed, and UGE Day. It looked as if Michael Schumacher and Ferrari had bounced back from their 2005 slump as he took pole position. Defending champion Alonso started 4th and got up to 2nd on the first lap, and he and Schumacher went back and forth all race, and Alonso eventually took the win at the start of 2021 light. Raikkonen started last but finished 3rd. Massa didn't have the best debut with Ferrari, spinning early on and almost taking out Alonso and finishing outside the points. Super Aguri didn't have the best debut either. They were abominably slow, Yuji Ide ran over the pit crew, and they had a double engine failure. Rosberg, by contrast, did have a strong debut. He lost his front wing on the first lap, but was able to recover from this and finish 7th with fastest lap. In 5th, you voted for 2012. The Bahrain Grand Prix had taken a sabbatical in 2011 on account of the Arab Spring protests, but came back in 2012 despite widespread protesting against it across the country. It was the first running of the race with both Pirelli tyres and DRS, which meant that compared to 2010 we had mixed up strategies and plenty of overtaking. Vettel took pole and the win, becoming the 4th winner in 4 races and getting his title defence back on track. Raikkonen and Grosjean were 2nd and 3rd, which would be repeated 1 year later, and the first cracks started forming between Hamilton and McLaren as a botched pit stop dropped him from 2nd to 8th. In 4th, you voted for 2020. Let's be honest, there's only one thing people remember about this race: the stray dog doing laps in FP2. Mercedes took a comfortable 1-2, one race after Hamilton had clinched his 7th title. Racing Point had a disastrous race, as Stroll collided with Kvyat and got flipped upside down, and Perez had a potential podium taken away by an engine failure. Oh, and this happened to Grosjean. In third, you voted for 2022. The 2022 race gave us the return of ground effect, and with it, endless discussions about cetacean mammals. With these technical changes came the expected grid reshuffle, with notable slumps for both Mercedes and McLaren, and Ferrari and Haas refinding their mojo. One intention of these new cars was to make overtaking easier, and we got that from the outset. Verstappen and Leclerc, who before this had already had several on-track battles, exchanged the lead several times in what became a game of DRS chicken between the two. Max was moaning for large parts of the race and lost power at the end along with teammate Perez, giving Ferrari an easy win and signs that they would pick up the pieces following the demise of Red Bull and Mercedes. Oh, how young and naive we were. In second, you voted for 2021. This was another race of firsts. The first race for Sergio Perez at Red Bull, Carlos Sainz at Ferrari, Daniel Ricciardo at McLaren, Sebastian Vettel and Lance Stroll at Aston Martin, Fernando Alonso and Esteban Ocon at Alpine, and the first of Alonso's return, and the first ever race for Alpine, Aston Martin, Yuki Tsunoda, Mick Schumacher and Nikita Mazepin. Despite the fact that the virus that shall not be named had meant that the proposed technical changes for 2021 had been postponed for 1 year and every team was running basically the same car as in 2020, there was a huge amount of hype going into 2021 as Verstappen and Red Bull had come out on top at the season-ending Abu Dhabi Grand Prix in 2020, despite the season being dominated by Hamilton and Mercedes, and Red Bull had performed well in testing where Mercedes struggled, signalling we were set for a titanic year of the young battling the old, akin to 2006 and the first 3 races of 1994. This was reinforced as Verstappen took pole ahead of Hamilton. It became a battle of strategy as Verstappen ran a long first stint which meant Hamilton undercut him, but that Verstappen would be faster in the final stint. A popular trend among race control that year was to give confusing and contradictory definitions of what did and didn't count as track limits violations at each circuit instead of just keep at least one wheel within the white line at all times, and so drivers were constantly running wide on the exit of turn 4, which sometimes was illegal and sometimes wasn't. Verstappen and Hamilton both did this on almost every lap, and Verstappen also did so when he retook the lead there on lap 52. His team then advised him to cede position again as a caution, which he did at an ill-timed spot and was unable to get past again, which gave Hamilton the win. Game on. Elsewhere, Sergio Perez's first race with Red Bull did not go so well as he didn't make it to Q3, then almost lost the engine on the formation lap and started from the pit lane but still climbed to 5th. Mazepin, who was already hanging by a thread, had blocked several drivers in qualifying but mercifully crashed out on his own barely half a mile into the race. And finally, in first, you voted by a considerable margin for 2014. To commemorate the 10-year anniversary of the Bahrain Grand Prix, and it being Formula One's 900th Grand Prix, in 2014 it became a night race. This was another year of change as the first year of the V6 turbo hybrids. Despite the expected grid reshuffle, there was widespread criticism of the new cars as they were ugly, slower than before, sounded like absolute ass, were also extraordinarily unreliable in testing, and had so far produced 2 substandard races. It was Mercedes who locked out the front row, who so far had cracked the code with the new cars, with Rosberg on pole, as with the previous year. There was action all across the grid. Adrian Sutil and Jules Bianchi had a coming together, Pastor Maldonado and Esteban Gutierrez played Robot Wars,
In for the big flip! They're gonna flip him! No, it's all over!
and a floundering Red Bull climbed through from their low grid slots. The race was dominated by Mercedes-powered cars, with 6 of the first 8 positions being taken by them, but what unfolded at the very front became known as the Jewel in the Desert. Hamilton took the lead from Rosberg at the start, and Rosberg then unsuccessfully tried to take it back at the end of the first stint. He closed up again in the final few laps, and they went back and forth in a perfect demonstration of tough but fair racing, and Hamilton eventually came out on top and took the win, signalling the rivalry that would unfold between the two over the next 3 seasons. That's all for this video. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram and TikTok at Brook_F1. A huge shout out and thank you as ever to my Patreon subscribers. Do subscribe to my Patreon if you want early access to audio only versions of each video, as well as a few videos that YouTube won't allow me to put up, and I'll see you all next time.